We often view the wide expanse of time known as the Renaissance period as being a golden era of the recorder's history in Europe. As recorder players, it is tempting for us to look back through rose-tinted glasses at a world in which our instrument was treated like a real instrument, or even took centre stage. But is this taking a step too far? Did the recorder really have such a gilded youth? As with most things, the surviving sources paint a much more complex picture. As a recorder player living in the 21st century, it's impossible to ignore the stereotypes that the instrument has largely come to be defined by. Many people will have first experienced the recorder in primary school, perhaps as their first introduction to instrumental music making, and will be familiar with the squeaks that are all too easily produced on an instrument with a fixed windway. This, alongside the fact that the recorder is not an orchestral instrument, it is not conventionally placed in a string quartet, piano trio, wind quintet or big band, means that it often becomes branded as a starter instrument, or a stepping stone towards learning something a bit more useful. In this video, I'd like to delve back in time to explore the recorder's reputation historically. Is it only in the 20th and 21st centuries that the instrument has received such bad press? It's easy to assume that the recorder only took on this role as a starter instrument in the 20th century, with the foundations of mass production of factory instruments enabling the recorder to be bought and taught en masse. From examining music teaching resources from the past, however, it seems that this is not necessarily the case. The recorder appears frequently in instrumental tutor books from the early 16th century around Europe, particularly for beginners, explaining the basics of learning the instrument. The recorder's appearance in these tutor books may have been because it was comparatively simpler for instructors to explain the ins and outs of an instrument with a fixed windway than it was to teach a complex embouchure such as that of a reed instrument. In German-speaking regions, there was Musica getoucht in 1511 by Sebastian Vader, also translated into other languages for dispersal around Europe, and two distinct editions of the Musica Instrumentalis Deutsch of Martin Agricola in 1529 and 1545. Containing the rudiments of instrumental music, particularly for the students of the Lutheran Lateinschulen. So it seems that, in a way, Agricola was using the recorder in a similar way to how it is used in schools today. The difference being that the primary purpose of music making was for the praise and worship of God. There was clearly a growing market for amateur self-taught instrumentalists as the 16th century progressed. As books and printed materials became cheaper and more accessible, this opened the door for music as an enjoyable pastime for the middle classes. Playing the recorder offered the possibility of playing chamber music with others, and was also cheaper and more portable than some of the alternatives. It seems therefore that the recorder has actually performed an important pedagogical role in historical music making. So how about the professional recorder player? Now this is where it gets really complicated. Nowadays, when we think about professional musicians in Western classical music, we will most often be able to pinpoint a specific instrument that that person specialises in. The concert pianist, orchestral clarinet player, the violin virtuoso, or even the conductor. It's true that these individuals will often have multiple roles in that field: performer, teacher, researcher. There are many exceptions, of course, but it seems that a large proportion of Western classical musicians today will specialise in a particular instrument or area of music. Historically, however, this was not usually the case. Our post-romantic view of the performer as artist is rather different from the 16th century musical vocation. The professional musician was most commonly a multi-instrumentalist employed by court, church or city to perform a variety of different roles. Even Jacob van Eyck, an icon of our histories as a recorder, wore multiple different hats. He was also primarily a bell tuner and carillon player. Similarly, Silvestro Ganassi, although we can make the assumption from the complexity of skill demonstrated in La Fontegara that he must have been a fairly astounding recorder player. The biographical information that we have suggests that he was employed by San Marco in Venice as a wind player, therefore also playing a whole variety of other wind instruments to a very high standard. From Howard Mayer Brown's compilation of the surviving instrumentations of the Florentine Intermedi, which were large royal musical and theatrical displays, it seems that the recorder really did not feature very often in these, and was most commonly used as a colour or filler instrument amongst others. All in all, it seems the idea of the professional recorder player is rather a modern concept. In order to be employable, it was necessary for the professional musician to master a number of different instruments as part of their trade. This is also why it is so difficult to get a grasp of how regularly the recorder was played by professional instrumentalists in different parts of Europe. how about at court? We often hear about Henry VIII's interest in the recorder, his extensive collection of instruments, and how he was exercising himself daily in shooting, singing, dancing, wrestling, casting of the bar, and playing at the recorders, flute, virginals, and in setting of songs. We do not hear so often about the recorder in continental European courts at a similar time. I'm now going to discuss some sources that have come to light concerning a dialogue between Isabella d'Este and her instrument maker Lorenzo da Pavia concerning the recorder at the court of Mantua, in order to demonstrate how the recorder was perceived in an alternative courtly context. I believe that this may have reflected the views not only of this individual, but actually a larger sector of the nobility, due to wider cultural considerations and also the dispersal of an influential book, all of which will now be discussed in more detail. But first of all, who was Isabella d'Este? Isabella d'Este was born into the Italian nobility in 1474 in Ferrara. She later married Marchese Francesco Gonzaga, therefore becoming Marchesa of Mantua. She had powers in matters of governance, but was also a patron of the arts and a musician herself. In 1497, Lorenzo da Pavia, instrument maker to Isabella, wrote a letter to her, including an offer to make a recorder for her out of a piece of bone. Isabella replied to the letter, but on the subject of the recorder, her only comment was, "Concerning that bone, don't drive us mad with talk about recorders, we don't want it." So why did Isabella view the recorder in such a negative light? Musicologist William Preiser suggests that courtly culture, mythological connotations, and the medieval hierarchy of musical instruments each had a part to play in this, and I will explore each of these factors now. Recorders, or related fiddle flute instruments, appear frequently in religious iconography of the 15th century, often in the hands of angels. These images regularly feature the Virgin Mary depicting the Annunciation, or Mary holding a newly born infant Jesus. It would be tempting to read into this that the recorder was therefore an object of religious symbolism. However, placed in context, it can be noted that many of these images contain a whole range of different instruments. This extract from Psalm 150 perhaps explains why paintings often contain a multitude of instruments that we would not necessarily expect to play together during this time. Praise him with the sounding of the trumpet. Praise him with the harp and lyre. Praise him with timbrel and dancing. Praise him with the strings and pipe. Praise him with the clash of cymbals. Praise him with resounding cymbals. It seems therefore that the purpose of these instruments in iconography was to illustrate praise, alongside the religious relics, bright colours, and occasionally text, sometimes incorporated in subtle ways. For example, in this painting where the angels sing from notated music, which has been found to belong to Walter Fry's Ave Regina Celorum, or Hail Queen of Heaven. Nevertheless, in order to be included in such images, presumably the recorder must have received a sufficiently high status. Why then was Isabella d'Este so disdaining of the instrument? Was it merely for personal sound aesthetic reasons, or was there something considered culturally wrong about the recorder? Published in 1528, but compiled over the course of around 20 years, Baldassare Castiglione's The Book of the Courtier gives some clues as to the expected etiquette of Italian high society at the time. The book was widely translated and disseminated across Europe, so was hugely influential. In a discussion on the practice of making music, Castiglione describes how the human voice leads much ornament and grace to all these instruments, with which I would have a courtier at least to some degree acquainted, albeit the more he excels with them, the better, without troubling himself much with those that Minerva forbade to Alcibiades, because it seems that they are ungraceful. To the 21st century reader, this language seems a little cryptic, especially to those of us who are unfamiliar with the details of classical mythology. However, by unpicking this statement, it becomes clear that these forbidden instruments were in fact wind instruments, and more specifically flute-like instruments, which the Roman goddess Minerva is said to have invented from reeds. According to mythology, When Minerva realised how unflattering she looked blowing on this instrument, she was horrified and threw it away. William Pryser states that Isabella d'Este would certainly have been well versed in mythology, pointing out that a copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses, featuring this tale, was in the inventory made of the books in her possession. Not only would Isabella have been under the influence of this literature, but also artwork. In a painting by Correggio, The Allegory of Vice, in Isabella's personal art collection, a pastoral scene is depicted. The central character is tormented by the surrounding three characters, one of whom blows with puffed out cheeks on a recorder-like fiddle flute instrument. In comparison, the instrument featured in the Allegory of Virtue, also present in Isabella's collection, was a harp, elegantly plucked by an angel. In other artworks of this period, the recorder is used as an object of sexual symbolism. Surely then it comes as no surprise that Isabella had a preference for plucked stringed instruments, such as the lute. It seems from Castiglione's treatise that appearing elegant whilst engaged in any activity was of the utmost importance to the courtier, and particularly for women. This is explicitly stated in the following passage. Imagine how unlovely it would be to see a woman play drums, fifes, or trumpets, or other like instruments, and this because their harshness hides and destroys their mild gentleness, which so much adorns every act a woman does. Castiglione's treatise is also of interest to musicologists because here can be found the first recorded reference to the term sprezzatura in this context. Castiglione states that it shall conceal design and show that what is done and said is done without effort and almost without thought. From this perspective, it becomes clearer why playing wind instruments was frowned upon. Holding an instrument in the mouth and in some instances having an embouchure to contend with somewhat limits the extent to which an effortless facial expression can be maintained in comparison to a string or keyboard instrument, for example. Altogether, these factors demonstrate a complex network of societal and cultural expectations that may have influenced the perception of the wind instrument family as a whole on the refined courtier. Not only did these instruments have negative symbolic connotations in relation to antiquity, but the mechanics of them also went against the fundamental quality of sprezzatura that was so important to the etiquette of the courtier. A classic example of the superficiality of this courtly text can be seen in the following quotation, also from Castiglione. A certain motet, which was sung before my Lady Duchess, found no favour and was not thought good until it was known to be the work of Josquin de Pré. I think that this demonstrates clearly just how important it was to be perceived as keeping up with popular taste and fashion. In a society heavily dictated by class systems and divides, the growing popularity of the recorder amongst the middle classes may have inadvertently turned the nobility against such an instrument, as it was associated with the bourgeoisie. The idea of symbolic connotations expressed by the recorder seems to have continued into the 17th and 18th centuries. We can see this through its appearance in vanitas paintings. These images illustrate the brevity of life and the worthlessness of worldly pleasures. Like in the earlier paintings where the recorder features in pastoral scenes, here it is symbolic of sexual love. Even in the 18th century, J.S. Bach, for example, still uses recorders and other instruments in these same symbolic ways, particularly in his cantatas. So what can we learn from all of this? Looking at reputation in a historical context is misleading through our 21st century post-romantic filter, and we should not try to glamorise or glorify the past. As we experience today, things are constantly falling in and out of fashion in different places and in different cultures, and therefore it's important not to try to overgeneralise. As recorder players, I think we can sometimes feel a bit out of place in the 21st century music scene, hence our dependence on historical sources and this idea of authenticity for validation. By trying to perfectly reconstruct our instrument's former glory, we will most likely be disappointed, often by the sheer lack of information and sources that survive. Maybe we could try being less hung up with all this and enjoy playing the instrument and the music we love just because we love it. That in itself is surely justification enough. We should embrace the fact that our instrument can be so accessible. The fact that decent quality recorders are accessible without breaking the bank should be celebrated. Surely being able to use plastic instruments that are robust and washable is an asset. Rather than admitting defeat with teaching recorder in schools, we should be fighting to have much, much more of it, enabling more people to experience the joys of playing an instrument beyond the first few squeaks.